Online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Listen up, comrades of the world. Unite! He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway celebrates the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Come have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the Open University of the airwaves. It's the last free space in the mainstream media. So make use of it. I'm here tonight till 10 o'clock and then every day next week, Mondays through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then back again, God willing, next Friday night at 7 p.m. with the mother of all talk shows.
Revolutionary radio with Citizen Galloway.
Is unique, wouldn't you say?
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio.
I did not say that.
Now in another Britain, a better Britain, and I pray that we reach there before he's too old, my next guest would be a member of a Senate or an upper house in the British Parliament. He's the Professor of Children's Literature. He's every father, mother, grandfather and grandmother's favourite children's author. I have myself a house full of his work. He's Michael Rosen, and he joins me now. Michael, welcome to the show.
Good evening, George.
Now, we both know Jeremy Corbyn very well, and we both know that he's not an effing anti-Semite and he's not a racist. So why do you think Margaret Hodge, Dame Margaret Hodge no less, in Parliament, in front of journalists, shouted that in his face the other night?
Well, it is very peculiar. She's known Jeremy for 40 years, I should think, at least. And I don't think she's ever levelled that allegation at him ever before. And if she really does think that, then the way to do that would be to raise it through the instruments in the Labour Party or in private. So that sort of strange, what seems to have been like a shouty thing, went on behind the Speaker's chair in the House of Commons. It was obviously a political demonstration on her part. She wanted it to be noticed and she wanted the whole press to see it because we have a battle royal on at the moment. What is quite clear to me is that there are people in the Labour Party, I'm not in the Labour Party myself, but the Parliamentary Labour Party, who would rather the Labour Party was split than for Corbyn to win. And there is, in their eyes, a great danger, in my eyes, a great hope, that Corbyn might win an election if the Tories go on eating each other, which is what they're doing at the moment. So, having consumed each other over a period, it's quite possible the government would collapse and somebody would have to call an election, perhaps the Queen. Who knows how it's done? But and the great fear for the Margaret Hodge wing of the Labour Party, the remnants of the old Blair government and the new ones like Chuka-Umunna and so on, they're getting ready to split. I mean, I can tell you on very, very good evidence that prior to Theresa May calling that snap election, Alistair Campbell was ringing up people in television and others saying, would you like to be an MP in this new party I'm about to form?
Yes, I predicted that myself in my talk-up in the beginning, and we'll come back to that, Michael.
So I think Margaret Hodge was, in a sense, she was raising a banner for this, whatever you want to call it, third way, eighth way, new way, old way, whatever it is. And she was raising the standard for that and saying, this is what we're doing. And one of the ways we're going to do it is to claim that somehow or other Corbyn and people around him are raving anti-Semites.
I first thought it was late at night. Some of these MPs like a glass of champers or a bottle or two, and that it was some kind of aberration, some kind of regrettable incident that could be massaged past. But she then took to The Guardian and said that she stood by her action and her words. So she does, in the cold light of day, regard Corbyn in these vile terms. And that speaks to the point you've just made, that this was a carefully considered, at least carefully considered after the fact, if not before, a carefully considered, I call it a provocation.
Oh, yes, no. And more than that, it's orchestrated in how she has presented herself. So she presents herself, quite rightly, as many Jewish people of Jewish background present themselves at all times, reminding everybody, as we do, me too, that our relatives, quite close relatives, suffered grievous harm during the Holocaust. Now, when you do that in an argument, when you accuse somebody of being an anti-Semite, you, in a sense, sort of draw them into this whole terrible set of events that took place in Germany and Europe between 33 and 45, and you draw them into it, and somehow, by connotation, by attachment, if you like, that somehow or other it's implicated, that because you first of all claim they're anti-Semites, and somehow they're joined to this terrible thing that happened. So again and again, when the story was presented in the news, you heard that Margaret Hodge was the veteran MP who herself had suffered, her family had suffered in the Holocaust. Now, is this the same Margaret Hodge, say, for example, that the editor of the Jewish Chronicle described in the Daily Express in 2015 as by saying she drags the entire political system into disrepute? She would now be well advised to withdraw from public life. That wherever she is, she shows her sheer grubbiness. She's so suffused with her own righteousness that she thinks she is above the standard she would impose on mere mortals. She shows jaw-dropping hypocrisy. She's too fat, and so on. And prior to
It is indeed the same, and it's the same Margaret Hodge that Stuart Stevens took a whole page in the Evening Standard to denounce in similar terms. But the media tune has changed, doesn't it?
Well, we're supposed to forget, George. The point is we're supposed to have 1 week memories. So, you know, the fact that this woman who at one time, you remember way back when, she was described as an Islington lovey and that somehow or other was all part of the loony left. Then there was this other phase in her life where she was, you know, which she herself described, she managed with shameful naivety. We won't go into it just now in case we step on some toes. But then there was another whole issue of when she appeared to be behaving very well in the Standards Committee and the Auditing Committee, but it then turned out that in actual fact she was guilty of the very things that she was accusing others of.
Yes.
So there have been several phases in the life of Margaret Hodge.
But we're supposed to forget them.
And we're supposed to forget that. We're only supposed to have a week in the life of anybody. So she's moved from this kind of loveliness into a kind of Jewish Joan of Arc. That somehow or other she is this sort of poor, martyred figure, and therefore again gives validity to this outrageous, just sheer shouty match behind the Speaker's chair. All right, and then that then is somehow evidence, because of her the Holocaust background that many of us have, me included. That is somehow evidence that she must be right. The same woman who, as I say, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle could describe as totally hypocritical and be well advised to withdraw from public life. Well, she hasn't withdrawn from public life.
No, on the contrary, she's right now bang centre to it. Now, I think you pointed out on Twitter that people who are related to Holocaust victims, in some cases children, grandchildren, close relatives, murdered by fascism throughout Europe in the 33 to 45 period, are only really allowed to bring that up if they hate Jeremy Corbyn. If they are people, as many are, who actually like Jeremy Corbyn, like you, who have a similar background, they're not allowed. They're never given that credibility, speaking as the relatives of survivors of the Holocaust.
It seems not that those of us for whom that has happened, and when we say that I'm not described as someone, someone whose family who suffered the Holocaust supports Jeremy Corbyn. That sounds like very odd, doesn't it, to our ears?
Yeah.
But it's
never been heard.
It's not heard. So the way it's heard is that when you accuse Jeremy Corbyn of that, it gives credence to what you're saying. Somehow or other, she is a more credible witness, right? This is what's being claimed in the papers.
Yes. And Chuka, Mona and others leapt into print to make that very point in her defence. I should say that even Blair doesn't say that Corbyn is an anti-Semite. and a racist on Newsnight last night, as he was
he
predictably.
Didn't. He stepped aside from that one. I mean, he's also outside of Parliament, so of course the people are scooting around various issues around libel and defamation.
Yes, quite.
So he was being very, very careful. But
now, you also, I think it was you, it was good enough to be you, made the point earlier today that when Corbyn is behind in the opinion polls, he's a loser. When he's ahead in the opinion polls, he's an anti-Semite and a racist.
That's it. Well, he's moved miraculously from being the incompetent geography teacher to some kind of Nazi warlord. So it is just like extraordinary, the kind of transformation, because again, this is
remarkable,
press.
especially as we know him so well.
Creating these constructs is creating like a sort of Lego factory around somebody, a sort of Lego castle where you say 1 minute they're one thing and then you hope that people have forgotten that you were laughing at the fact that he had a jacket that was like a bit worn at the edges, and that now you're claiming that he's sort of running some sort of Nazi clique.
Yeah.
So they kind of flip-flop like that, and somehow or other we out there, we're supposed to believe these kind of manufactured stuff, you know?
Yeah. Well, we'll see, I suppose, in the next polls. They're certainly trying hard enough. Let me move it on, Mike, if I can, to what comes next, because I agree with you. Indeed, I said so at the beginning of the show, that there's no way back from this, really. If you see the front page of the Jewish Chronicle today and you survey the last 48 hours of coverage, it doesn't seem to me there's any way back from this. Corbyn cannot allow this to stand, and Blair made it clear enough, as have many others, like Chuka, that if any action is taken against the Dowager, that there will be severe consequences inside the Labour Party. So I do think that this is the cause célèbre around which this new political force is going to be born. Now, although neither of us looks it, we were both around when this happened before, and the SDP was formed. Do you think it'll be the same kind of thing, people breaking away, sitting as perhaps an independent group, or do you think Alistair Campbell's got a name and a HQ and a bank of telephones ready for something actual, concrete and new?
Well, we've got two or three things all going on at the same time that confuses us, I guess, and I'm as confused as anybody else. So we have the whole, obviously, the Brexit, Remain, the soft Brexit, the hard breakfast, the cold breakfast, the cold Brexit. We've got all that going on with many fracturings on all sides, with the government propped up by a group of people whose views that if people just knew, you know, we're not just talking about creationists, you know, we're talking about people who are bigots. We're talking about people, I'm talking about the DUP now, we're talking about a form of anti-Semitism that goes utterly unremarked, namely 2 or 3 of their DUP members are a form of, believe in a form of Christian Zionism, where all Jews, in other words, the Jews, which is often regarded as a very prejudicial way of talking, should all move to Israel, where will be converted to Christianity or put to the sword in order that the second coming might happen. Now, we can laugh at that and say, well, this is just the fantasy of some fundamentalists. This is the same lot of people who prop up Trump in America with massive amounts of money and support and voting in the key states. And the same thing is going on in this country, propping up Theresa May's government and indeed turning up at the anti-Semitic rallies, alleged anti-Semitism rally. Enough is enough. There they were, 2 of these DUP guys. And these are the people propping up the government at this very moment. It's teetering on the balance. That form of anti-Semitism never mentioned. And meanwhile, Stephen Pollard, editor of the Jewish Chronicle, is calling on the Jewish MPs to leave to create a new party. I don't know whether he is, in all seriousness, meaning that they should have a Vote Jewish party, or I don't know, but it seems like bizarre that he's inviting the Jewish members of parliament, I think there are about 10, to leave. And meanwhile, Chuka, who's made a play for the last 2 years to be the leader of this group, you know, every statement that I ever see him make, it's always done with the kind of ultimatums and the sort of in the it's like a kind of foreplay, isn't it? It's a kind of leadership foreplay that goes on of the sort of positioning. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, Campbell and Blair alive and well. I mean, we watched 20 minutes of a Blair interview on Newsnight last night. I mean, it was like a sort of laying on of hands, virtually.
Indeed, yes. Now, what I can tell you...
I have a feeling... Sorry to interrupt you, George. I have a feeling quite genuinely that they will take an opportunity like this to walk out in some form or another, whatever parliamentary system they'll use, renouncing the whip. I mean, after all, John Woodcock has already gone without resigning, so he's, in a sense, utter contempt of his constituents and just said, I'm resigning. Why? Do his constituents, do his Parliamentary Labour Party think that was a good idea? He didn't say, he just went. And this is the man who does what is regularly called by Jewish people goy-splaining, where the goy is a word meaning non-Jewish, and you do, instead of mansplaining, they do goy-splaining, stand in front of Jews and tell them what's wrong with them and what they should be doing. So Woodcock does a lot of that.
Well, and indeed they declare some people to be good Jews and some bad. Let me tell you...
Oh, indeed. I'm one of the bad ones. So it's a form of anti-Semitism that's not
in
called
itself,
anti-Semitism. Yeah.
Well, look, I've got breaking news for you because it's just dropped. An emergency motion has been tabled to amend the standing orders of the Parliamentary Labour Party. The emergency motion stands in the name of Louise Ellman and Ruth Smith.
Yes.
And it is that the Parliamentary Labour Party standing orders be amended as follows, with immediate effect, that the Parliamentary Labour Party accepts and abides by the full International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, including all of its accompanying examples. Now, this has been tabled. If the Parliamentary Labour Party passes it, a constitutional crisis will then exist between the national executive of the party and the PLP, because it's their contention that whatever are the standing orders of the Parliamentary Labour Party must, and they've accentuated the word must, be endorsed by the NEC. I myself would have a different definition of the word must there. I would argue that word in that context means that those new standing orders could not be in effect unless they had the endorsement of the National Executive Committee. But that may be the end of a needle around which there'll be a bit of dancing and a final severance.
Maybe, but I mean, talking of dancing on needles or dancing on pins or whatever, I mean, this whole thing, this definition of anti-Semitism, it's a great cumbersome document. And I've read an article today in The Guardian by Brian Klug, a philosophy professor and indeed Jewish himself, who says that the reason why the way it's been phrased, by the way the Labour Party has phrased it, is a good way of doing it, and people have argued about it. They've changed some of the words, and there's four clauses, four examples that the Labour Party have taken out. The problem is with the whole thing, I mean, it's a shame in a way, I think, that the Corbynistas have allowed themselves to be hung out to dry on this thing, because they're trying to draw into the idea of anti-Semitism. The basic principle of anti-Semitism, when people are arguing about it, is do you dislike, are you hostile to, do you hate Jews because they're Jews? That's the solid core of what anti-Semitism is, and that is a form of prejudicial speech and writing. But there is also discrimination, and what makes me fed up is the fact that we so easily slide between these two things. So there we have the Windrush scandal. Here is an example of discrimination. People's lives ruined and wrecked by racist legislation and racist activity by the immigration authorities, which have fundamentally affected people's lives, livelihoods, state of mental health, and indeed in some occasions probably driven to early death. That's discrimination. And then we have prejudice, where we say foul things. I say to you, George, you are foul and horrible because you are Scots. That is prejudice. Yes? That's prejudice. Now, of course, that is revolting and horrible. But this whole code that has come in, it is not only prejudice about you as a Jew because, and we know all the old tropes about what Jews are or supposedly are, it's about what you say about a foreign power. And this foreign power, obviously, we don't have to mince words, is the state of Israel. So suddenly we now have an extraordinary code of practice where if you say something horrible about a foreign state, you are therefore being prejudicial to Jews, you are being anti-Semitic. This couldn't hold up in a court of law anywhere. If I said something horrible about Iceland, or I say something horrible about America, or Canada, or you name the country, so long as I'm not actually provoking a hate crime, but I'm just saying, let's imagine the place is called, it's Ruritania, and I say, Ruritania, it's terrible, they do awful things to people in Ruritania, and then that's not going to stand up in a court of law. So we have a code of practice that only works inside institutions about barring people as to whether they can belong or not. Well, fine, institutions need codes of practice, but the idea that it should depend on what you say about a foreign power, an irony of ironies, this week that foreign power has passed legislation that is discriminatory against 1.8 million of its own its own citizens. It's passed legislation. I mean, you couldn't make it up. That in the very week that this happens, we're debating whether you should say something nasty or not about this country. I mean, in fact, there are people in the state of Israel at the moment, liberal Zionists, saying stuff about Israel that if you said it here now inside the Labour Party, you get chucked out.
Exactly so. The Haaretz leader writers would be witch hunted out of the Labour Party for what they're writing every day.
Yeah, there's an article in the Washington Post this week by a guy who describes himself as an Israeli-American, who's obviously a liberal Zionist, who is absolutely appalled with the state of Israel. He can hardly hold himself back from saying stuff about Netanyahu and about the state of Israel and the fact that, the way it discredits Israel and the way it draws it, drawing into his if you like, his attack on the state of Israel. He's not using classic anti-Semitic tropes, of course not, but at the same time, he's describing Israel in a way that people say, well, that sounds like singling out Israel. You remember, this is one of the things in the code.
One of the examples, yeah.
So in fact, even now, right, imagine if I was in the Labour Party, I've singled out Israel, so I better stop now, and I better talk about Ruritania, America, Britain, and Egypt.
Even though we do all the time, in any case.
Show that I'm not singling it out.
In any case, we don't single it out.
Indeed.
We attack Saudi Arabia on an hourly basis.
Indeed. What has Jeremy said, unlike almost any other politician in the last 20 years has said, in his position, that we can no longer go on selling arms to Saudi Arabia. We must reach a new arrangement with Saudi Arabia. It cannot go on doing this because Saudi Arabia is engaged in a war, and by proxy, we're involved in that war as well. But also, we're in a sense, indirectly been involved in some of the lines of terrorism that have originated in Saudi Arabia, that we've been proxy in that as well. And this is an appalling relationship to be in, and Jeremy Corbyn has actually stood up about that, whereas, bar one or two backbenchers, to their credit, on both sides of the House who've said it, and Jeremy when he was in fact a backbencher, but front benches absolutely consistently have backed the relationship between the UK and Saudi Arabia. So when we say singling out Israel, well, the Saudis probably think that, Jeremy Corbyn has singled out Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. Professor Michael Rosen, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.
Talk Radio.
Join the Talk Nation.